Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. Today, we're going to be talking about how to build a UI table view programmatically without storyboards, and then also allowing the table to insert cells and rows like that. And the table view is going to contain a header as well. Also, you can delete the cells like that by clicking on the delete button and insert more cells. And the last thing we're going to do, if we have time, is to execute a batch insert on the table. So clicking that, you'll see that some cells coming from the right and some cells coming from the left. And that's one of the little more advanced topics for today's tutorial. Now, let's get into the actual application code on how to build this. We're going to start from scratch, and we go into Xcode and create an application, single view app. I'm going to call it my table view 1. Hit next. Doesn't matter so much what you call it, as long as you create a directory of some kind. Now, I'm going to hit Command R to run, just to make sure and verify that the application works. Cool. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to totally delete the storyboard file. Don't be afraid of doing that. It doesn't hurt too much as long as you delete this main property there. And so now that we're no longer relying on the storyboard, we have to manually create this window that the storyboard creates for us. So I'm going to say bounds like that, and window make key invisible. You also have to specify the root view controller, which is also what the storyboard does for you. And so what goes in here? We will use a navigation controller like that, and provide a root view controller for that as well. And what is root view controller? Well, we'll call it something here, and that something is going to be the view controller that was given to us by the template project. I'm just gonna call it my table view controller. And while we're here, let's subclass it as UITableViewController, which gives us a table view for free. It's always good to get free things. Now, we will go ahead and I'm just going to build it like that. And we have to specify this controller now as my table view controller, like that. Root view controller should be controller. And this Windows root view controller will be our navigation controller. Having done that, we'll run the app. And then you see how we now have our table view controller right here that has really no cells. It's just showing a bunch of lines by default. And everything's working as we would expect, very simply by creating the window and the navigation controller with our custom controller. So the first question is, how do we specify the cells in this table view now? Before I do that, I'm going to create a title just to make sure that we are where we want to be. So run that, delete that line, and okay, title is showing up. Now we want to provide the number of cells for this this table view. So to do that, we specify table view's number of cells method, which is down here somewhere. Okay, number of rows in section. Let's return 5 for now. And you also have to return the actual view for the cell. To do that, we provide cell for row at index path, which is right there. And we have to return some kind of cell that is dequeued by the table view. And that requires an identifier and the index path like that, which is here. Identifier is something we have to establish ourselves. That we do by first registering a cell to return or to be dequeued. And I'm going to say my cell like that. And my cell will be a custom class that we create, which is a subclass of UITableViewCell. And then here we have to override the initializer method. Yes, it's that one. So let's just call super style that as well. And in here, we'll call a custom method that we'll create in just a bit called setupViews. Cool. Let's fix that. Swift requires this initializing method, so make it happy by complying with what Xcode tells you to do. And here, we'll create that setupViews method. And then, in order to register this cell, you have to say myCell.self. And for the cell identifier, let's just create it inline like that and provide that identifier there. And now, let's call this myCell instead. Great. Everything looks okay. We want to run the application now just to make sure everything's fine. Okay, we have our table view now, and nothing is showing up in the cells, which is sort of what we expect because we haven't added much inside of the cell. Now we will add a label called name label, and we create this programmatically as well by saying UI label, let's say label to text equals sample item, and just return the label like that, and paren to execute this block, which will return this label to us. And we actually have to hit equal here instead, and that will return that label. Now, so in order for that label to show up, we have to add it into the subview hierarchy like that. And in the new auto layout system, we specify constraints to have that label show up. So this is not too tricky, and I'll explain to you what this means. Views dictionary will be v0, and this will be name label. So this is saying we're going to span the left edge to the right edge with v0, where v0 is name label. And then we'll also specify the vertical constraints as well by just saying, instead of h, we'll specify v. And now we will run that one more time. What you'll see is this sample item showing up inside of there, but not just yet, because in auto constraint or auto layout constraints, we have to specify translates auto resizing mask into constraints is false, just like that. And then hitting run, we'll get the sample item like that. And let's just say we want to push the label 16 pixels from the left edge. We'll get the sample item not hugging the left wall so much. And if we want to change the font size, we can just provide a UI font of bold system font like that. Okay, now that I have my mic fixed, let's move on to creating our section header, which will be very, very similarly created, just like our cell. So let's create a header called header, and we'll have to subclass UITableView header footer view. And in here, it also comes with an initializer called init with reuse identifier, and let's just override that and call super reuse identifier, and then let's just also call setupViews here, fixing this guy. We'll get that, and then we can just copy and paste all the code that we have for the cell like that. And in here, we'll just say my header. And now we have to actually register this header by calling the top method like that, called header self. And here we'll just specify header ID inline. Now we have to return the header view, which is one of these bottom methods here, view for a header in section. And we'll just dequeue it like what we do with our cells. Use that. And then we will say header ID. Now I'm going to run that, but the header is not going to show up because we haven't specified a size for the header. Let's do that here. Section header height. Let's just specify 50, and you'll see it show up sort of grayish with a label on the left. And the reason why we're not seeing the label, let's see, is because, let's see, I'm not sure if this is the right method. Okay, so we have to specify the last method at the very bottom, and that actually returns us a header view, which is now correctly saying my header like what we specified. So let's go into actually creating the button here and calling some code upon tapping the button. So to do that, we will specify a button called action button, and this will be just a regular old button like that, and we can just return the button like so, and we'll specify the button's title by setting the title, and we'll just call this action for now, and for the state we'll just use normal, which is pretty normal. Now we want to add the subview to the hierarchy of the views. This will be action button. This we need to fix to be that. Now, here is one of the trickier parts, which is to specify where that action button will live. Now, in order to push it to the right of the sample item UI label, we'll say, okay, 8 pixels from the right of that, we'll have some kind of view called view1, and 8 pixels from the right edge will be where it lives. Now I'm going to specify a width of 80 just by doing that. And here in the views dictionary, we have to specify what view1 is. So view1 is action button. And I'm going to copy and paste that constraint right there. And say action button spans vertically, edge to edge, like that. So running that, we'll get the action button, but not quite, because we haven't specified that to false, which is a bit of a pain, but we deal with that every now and then. Okay, now that action button is there. So let's specify type here to be a system type. Okay, now that we've specified the button type as system, we see it showing up right there. So in order to execute code upon tapping the action, we simply specify the button's action selector. So down here, we'll say action button, add target. And for target, we'll say self, and selector, we'll say handle action. For controller events, specify touch up inside. Now we actually create that function called handle action. So we'll say tapped, print that out to the console. Now, let's see what that does. So as I tap this action button here, the console logs tapped like what we specified. So that's pretty good. Now we have a handle on what the action does. So let's go ahead and try to delete this cell upon hitting the action. Okay, first I'm going to rename it as delete. And now we want to actually access from the cell some kind of method inside of TableViewController, right? Before we do that, let's create a container for our our items data source. So what I mean is I'm just going to create items equals some kind of array. Let's call it item 1, item 2, item 3. Nothing too complicated, and the number of cells will not be 5, but the count of items. So running that, we'll see 3 items, just like that, but instead of sample item as our text, we want to use the actual string inside of our array. So instead of cell for row@indexPath, I'm going to say my cell is actually that dequeued cell, and downcast it as a myCell object. Now I can access my cell's name label, and its text is items. Let's access the proper index by saying row, and then we'll return that cell. Having done that, our table view renders the item properly now. So in order to get the delete to work, I want to call a method on the TableViewController called, let's say, delete cell. And for this, let's just specify the parameter that it'll take. So I'm going to say cell is UITableViewCell. Okay, so how do I call this method from within my cell class? Well, that's easy. We specify a property called myTableViewController, and then we specify as an optional here, and then in handle action we'll say myTableViewController delete cell, and cell is just self. So running that, we will actually call nothing, because if we put a breakpoint here, hit the delete button, notice that in self, myTableViewController is nil. And that's because we haven't specified the cell's controller. So myTableViewController is equal self, like that. And now let's remove that, dragging it away. And if we specify a breakpoint here now and delete cell, we will trigger it by hitting the delete button, and that's where we are. Cool. That hopefully is pretty straightforward. As you can see, it's not too difficult. Moving on, we'll actually delete the cell very simply by finding the index path of the cell. So there is a method called deleteRowsAtIndexPaths on TableView. And we just need to figure out what this index path array should be. So to figure out, we simply do this. If let deletion index path is TableView index path for cell. And cell is the cell that we just tapped on. And now we have a handle on the index path. So I'm going to cut this guy, put it in there. And for index paths, it's expecting an array of index to delete. And we just specify that index path like that. And for row animation, you can use a couple of these methods. Let's just use automatic and run. So if you delete, it's going to crash because at the very bottom of the logger, it's saying that we don't have the proper amount of rows after deletion. So the thing that you have to do is you have to actually remove the item from your data source. And we do that by just calling items.remove with the index of the index path that we want to delete. Now we hit that and the item disappears like you would expect. So pretty straightforward. And now let's move on to actually inserting an item into the table view. So first we ask ourselves, how do we want to trigger this? Now, the way that I can easily trigger actions is to add a button to the navigation bar at the very top. And I'm just going to say UI bar button with the title of insert. Style is plain. That, and target will be self, and selector will be saying insert. And we just create that insert method right below, like that. Now the easiest way to insert into a table view is to specify items dot, append, and then we'll say, okay, item, and then we need to insert the actual text. So it'll be items dot count, and then we'll say +1 for, let's say we have a count of 3. This will be inserted as items 4. Now, if we call TableView.reload data, we'll get the list refreshed with this new item. So table 4, like that. And if we want to specify an animation, we'll do the same thing as the deletion insertion or the deletion removal that we performed just a little earlier. And by figuring out what the index should be, we'll call the insertion. So TableView has insertRowsAtIndexPaths, just like the deletion method earlier. And we have to figure out what this index path variable should be. So that we can figure out very easily by saying insertion index path is equal to index path. All right, there we go. So we'll use this method for row, and this will be items.count +1 as well. And section will be 0 because we only have one section, which is the 0th section. And here we say insertion index path, like that, as an array. And let's just use automatic for now. So removing that, we should see a bit of animation as we insert into the table. Now it's crashing because we don't have exactly what we need. Let's see. So I believe the index path is actually counts -1 because we've just added a item to our list. Okay, now we are getting a bit of animation into the table view. So that's pretty good. And let's now specify a type of batch insert. So I'm going to use this, and then let's just create the left bar item like that, and we'll call a batch insert and use a method of insert batch, like so. And we can do a couple of things inside of insert batch. And for example, we can iterate through some kind of loop saying, okay, every time we add a new item, we call insertRowsAtIndexPaths. But that is not the most efficient way of doing so because it's going to require TableView to render itself multiple times. Now, the correct way of doing that, I'm just going to copy and paste into this method here. We have to call begin updates and end updates, and inside of that block, inside the duration of the begin and the end, we call our insertions and our deletions so that the table view can execute all the animations simultaneously. So the above code right here, all it's doing is splitting the insertions into two chunks. And if I run that, I'll just show you what it does. Okay, so batch insert will insert the top half from the right and the bottom half from the left, I believe. Okay, you see what's happening there? Let's delete these again. And so hit batch insert. You see all the animations happen at the same time simultaneously. And you do that by using this begin and end updates method call on table view. Cool. So hopefully that was pretty interesting, and hopefully you'll be able to use that in your future projects as well. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I know this was quite the faster style of tutorial, and hope you were able to follow along. If you liked the video, definitely comment and subscribe, because that really helps me with the channel and providing good content as well. That's about it. Hope you enjoyed and have a good day. Thanks. Bye-bye.